So for this tutorial, I am going to be using my Himi Gouache. And you'll see that most of them have dried out, but if you just spritz them with water, they will re-wet. They absolutely will not be the same consistency as they were before. They'll be a little bit more watery, but they work. They work just as well. Uh, I am going to tape my paper down with some washi tape, and you'll see that I'm using some Strathmore watercolor tiles. And I'll be using a couple of different brushes, mostly the 8 and the 4, and a flat brush for the background. So for the background, I don't know the names of these colors, so I'm just going to tell you more or less what colors they are. I'm using the medium blue. It looks quite bright in the little pot, um, mixed in with light blue, and then on top of that, I'm using the green that's in the Himi Gouache. So those are the three colors that I am laying down here. And as you'll see, I literally just re-wet the gouache. So it is very watery, but it gets a little bit thicker as the water sits and soaks in. And the gouache begins to get a little gummier. So that's kind of the consistency you want. Right now it's pretty watery, so I have to put down a couple of layers. But for this first layer, I'm using a combination of the green, the medium blue, and the very light blue to come up with this pretty tealish color. Once I have finished laying down this initial base, while it's still wet, I'm going to go in with the really dark blue that's in the gouache, and I am going to go over the entire piece with this dark blue. I'm going to go over it I'm going to give it a couple of passes so that all of the colors kind of meld together, and I'm just adding this dark blue to darken it up a touch. And again, I'll throw in a little bit of green over it just to kind of meld it all together, and this is going to be the background. So once you're satisfied with the color, feel free to add more or less of any one color. Make sure that it's fully dried before you move on to the second layer or third layer. Is this the third? This is the third. The foreground. Let's do that. We're gonna add a little moon, and I'm just going to put that directly in the center of the paper, and I'm going to go in with the white gouache, and just as I use with my white Copic opaque white, I am going to start at the edges, and you'll see that I'm putting it on pretty thick. Now keep in mind that gouache does behave like watercolor sometimes when you re-wet it. Or when you put something over it, it lifts up the bottom, unless you're working with acrylic gouache, which this is not. This is just pure gouache. So it really does behave just like watercolor. In fact, it's just really an opaque watercolor. So you are going to notice, if you're working with regular gouache and not acrylic gouache, that the paint underneath is going to get picked up, and I kind of do want that. I don't want the moon to be so stark and white, so it's okay that it's blending in. And you'll also see that just as I do with my Copic opaque white, I am blending it into the middle with water. And I'm going to continue doing this until the entire moon is filled, and then I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of depth by adding in some blue and a little tiny touch of black. My black goes a little bit overboard, but I tried to hide it with the blue. But nothing too fancy. The moon is going to be pushed to the background once we draw the foreground in, or once we paint the foreground in. So you don't have to make this super duper fancy. Throw a little paint on it and you are good to go. So when we start painting the grassy area in the front, we are going to go into the moon. So make sure that the moon is dry before you continue on. And now we're going to be working with just black. So I am taking the black and taking the very, very tip of my brush, and I'm drawing some lines straight up from the bottom. And I just tilted my paper so it'll give me a better, angle. So you want to vary the lines, some a lot longer than the others, some short. You can add way more, you can add less, whatever speaks to you. Make sure that you go into the moon. This will actually help push that moon to the background and make the foreground really stand out. Now, once you are done with the lines, you don't have to wait for it to dry. I grab a little bit of a bigger brush. I grabbed the size 8. And using the tip and the side of the brush, I'm going to start by using the tip and placing the tip on the paper and then pushing the brush down so that I get a nice, like, little ovalish splotch. That's what we're going to call it on the paper. And this is going to give the little leaves. This sort of looks like a little bit like eucalyptus, doesn't it? I don't know what exactly I was going for here, but we're going to say that. But yeah, so we're going to add it, add some to the right, add some to the left, add some to the middle. Just fill up every branch or stick or stem, and make sure you get the top, the little top piece as well. Okay, once you are satisfied with that, we are going to add some grassy area at the bottom. They're not really grass, it's gonna be like those really big leaves at the bottom. And I'm gonna use the tip of my brush, and just like when you're making leaves, you use the tip and then you kind of press down to make it a little bit broader at the top. And I am gonna go ahead. Now, you don't have to do this part. If you just want to add more of the eucalyptus-like leaves, then feel free to do that. You don't have to do this part. But it's just gonna push the leaves a little bit to the background, or the eucalyptus-like parts that we just painted. It's going to push that a little bit to the background, and the leaves are going to be, or the grassy leaves are going to be in the foreground. So I like to put as many as possible on the bottom, and I also like to cover the entire bottom piece so that they don't look like they're just kind of floating. So I'm going to do that now. I'm just adding in a ton of black to cover all the blue along the bottom, and I am trying to put it in kind of organically, just kind of stippling it in, and then pulling the brush up a little just to make it look a little bit more like grass. Now, you're not gonna really see this too much when you look at the overall picture, but in case anyone does kind of like, take a closer inspection of your piece, they'll see that this is grass. Okay, and now we are going to add the highlights. So for the highlights, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the colors that I use in the background. So I'm going to take a little bit of the green. I'm going to take a little bit of the lighter blue and a little bit of the darker blue. And I'm going to mix it all together I'll make sure that it's all mixed together, and this is going to give us the color that we used for the background. So whatever colors you used for the background are the colors that you want to use now. And when I am done, when I have the color that I want, I am going to take a generous amount of white gouache and I am going to add it to this so that we can lighten it up. So make it as light as you wish. I'm going to add 2 different layers so we can have sort of like, a little bit of, what do you call that? Like an ombre effect. So I'm going to start with this color and then I'm going to lighten it up even more in the next color. Or in the next pass. So I'm going to take this and I am going to add a little splash of this paint to the tops of all of the leaves. Now I do not recommend going over it more than once because we don't want to lift up the black. So I did that in the first couple and it lifted some of it up. So you don't want to do that. And if that does happen, just leave it alone. You can go over it again when it dries. Don't mess with it too much because you will lift up more and more of that black and that'll just get muddy and gray. So we're adding it to the very tops of every single leaf. All right, and once you're satisfied with how that looks, you can either leave it like this or you can take it a step further and add a little bit more white to your mixture. And you see I didn't add it to the entire mixture, I just added it to this little corner. And I added a generous amount of white and I am going to go over the very tops of what I just went over. But I'm going to make sure to leave a little bit of that lighter blue underneath so that you have kind of like 3 levels of color on here. You have the black, the lighter blue, and the even lighter one. And I'm going to add that to the tops of all of these as well as to parts of the grass. And I'm also going to add some grass in this color towards the end.